Chronic Illness Therapist podcast. This is meant to be a place where people with chronic illnesses can come to feel heard, seen, and safe while listening to mental health therapists and other medical professionals talk about the realities of treating difficult conditions. This might be a new concept for you, one in which you never have to worry about someone inferring that it's all in your head. We dive deep into the human side of treating complex medical conditions and help you find professionals that leave you feeling hopeful for the future. I hope you love what you learn here, and please consider leaving a review or sharing this podcast with someone you love. In this episode, Dr. Robin McFarland will be discussing insomnia and how sleeplessness is caused by and causes many other issues in the mind and body. You'll walk away from this episode feeling like a total badass that you are, because the passion Robin has for helping people live their lives to the fullest is really evident in how she speaks. Dr. McFarland has worked in hospitals, for the government, for colleges and universities, and is now in private practice. She started out treating anxiety and depression, but now she mostly helps people sleep better. She loves seeing people develop confidence in their abilities to get restorative sleep they need after years of sleeplessness. She's been a licensed clinical psychologist for over 20 years, was a supervisor for Columbia University's clinical psychology program, and an adjunct professor of assessment at the City College of New York City. Is contracted as an expert in psychological assessments for individuals in law enforcement and aviation, and is a postdoctoral fellow at Cornell Medical College. I am really excited to welcome Dr. Robin McFarland to the show. Hi.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Yes, so glad to see you here. So tell us a little bit about what you do in private practice, what kind of clients you see, and what is lighting you up these days.
Oh, sure. Well, I see people who have trouble sleeping, and I love seeing these people, not because I'm like nasty and like people that have trouble sleeping, but I like seeing them because I feel like the type of treatment I do can really help. And as we know, there's like a million different things marketed for sleep problems, like all kinds of medication, all kinds of like over-the-counter crap, and you know, and that really doesn't work. But this type of treatment, it's called CBT-I, and there's great evidence that it works. And I think that anybody who's having a real serious problem with insomnia should seek out that treatment.
Can you tell me a little bit about CBT-I? Because I will be 100% upfront and honest with you. I have such a bias against CBT, and I'm working on it because to me, CBT is like, change your thoughts, change your life. And so can you dispel that myth for us?
Yes. Look, I've been a CBT person for a long time, and I don't think that the fault of CBT is CBT. I think sometimes therapists, they learn it and they just apply it in a way that's not very thoughtful. Because I'll tell you one thing that I noticed, like people with chronic illnesses, okay? Like, you know, let's face it, it sucks, okay? It really, it's harder to live your life and interface with the world when you have a chronic illness. It just is. And sometimes CBT therapy can be used in a way that's a little bit invalidating, where the therapist will say something like, oh, you know, you think it sucks? Well, maybe it doesn't suck. Well, I don't know. You know, is that why you have a bias against CBT?
Yeah, and I think that's like a more like blunt way. I think that it can even sound really great, but I think you're right. Like in how the therapist does it, I think sometimes it's like, okay, you have chronic pain and you feel like life sucks and you're never going to get out of this hole. And so then they might jump to like, well, have you thought about it this way? Like, or where's the evidence for that? And it's like, well, I can tell you the evidence. I've been in pain for the last 5 years. I have lost friends. Right. So I think that kind of thing happens. And then you leave the session feeling like, oh, damn, like I'm feeling bad because I like have a thinking problem. And so I think you're right. Like, I think the more I've kind of, especially doing this podcast, I'm talking to so many different clinicians and people who have different practices. So I was like, okay, I need to really get comfortable with exploring this bias of mine.
Mhm.
And I am realizing that CBT has a much more appropriate place in this work than I originally thought before.
Yeah. And and I think the important thing about any kind of therapy is you first have to be a really good therapist, and that involves really like you really understanding the person before you jump into any kind of treatment. Um, and that's where I think CBT can fall apart. But
That makes sense.
it's well-meaning. They want to jump in and help, but until you really get where the person is, I think it's premature sometimes to jump in. Um,
I think that's what happens. Yeah. And that can happen in any therapy, right? We want to fix and we want to provide the solution. And
I
especially
know
with
it.
chronic pain, it's like a chronic illness. It's just like, I've been through all the solutions. They don't work. That is why I'm here. So, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the
Yeah,
research is clear too, that it's not about the technique. It's about the client therapist relationship and how that is going.
yeah.
So tell me more then about like CBT-I. What is it?
Sure,
How do you see it help? And
sure.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, first, right off the bat, because I think that there are a lot of people who have insomnia. Like, and by insomnia, I don't mean like 1 or 2 nights here and there of not sleeping. That's acute insomnia. That's actually normal. We all go through, like, I think there was a study that like uh over the span of every 2 years, the average person has at least 2 weeks where they have really crappy nights. So insomnia is like a little bit normal. But when somebody is having night after night of not sleeping and they're worried about sleep and they're very distressed, and it takes them more than 30 minutes to fall asleep, or they wake up in the night, or they wake up too early, and it's night after night, then they should probably seek out help. um and mostly the average person will go to a GP and say, I'm having a lot of problems sleeping, and sometimes that GP will give them some medication. And sleeping meds, they do work, but they work in the short term. Over the long term, their efficacy tends to fall apart. Short term, they're great. Long term, it can be sometimes a problem. And this particular type of therapy is interesting because in the short term, it's kind of hard to get the hang of doing it. But then in the long term, it tends to be very, very effective for insomnia. It's so effective that as of 2017, the American Academy of Physicians said that this is the frontline treatment for insomnia, not medicines, but CBT-I. So I could just go on and on, but
I love that. No, I absolutely love that. It feels, I'm already feeling a little bit hopeful,
yeah,
because
and,
there's
and
so many side
and
effects of these medications.
yes, and hope is what this is all about, because people with insomnia feel hopeless.
Yeah,
They really feel hopeless. It's like they try everything and nothing works.
right.
And I'll tell you something. We were talking earlier about marketing of wellness, and there is a huge billion-dollar industry marketing towards sleep. And everything is marketed as helping you sleep.
Yeah.
And this is what happens when people have insomnia. They have insomnia and they're like, oh, I saw an advertisement for this, or my friend said that this app helps them sleep, or this type of relaxation is supposed to help, and they try stuff thinking it's going to work. They go all in, and then it doesn't work and they feel hopeless.
The
And
amount of energy they put in,
yes,
it's like we all can work really hard if the reward is at the end. And I think that's what happens in so many different areas of wellness, sleep, diet, like
Yeah,
I can do this insane diet if it's going to work. But
absolutely.
it falls short, and then we've just wasted all of our energy and feel really hopeless.
And that's why I started to do CBT-I, because there's data showing that this really works better than almost anything else. And it's like when you lead people down a path and you say, okay, if you do this, this, and this, you want to say that there's something good at the end. And it's like supported by research. You hate to lead people down a difficult path that you don't have evidence is really going to work for them. Um, but this does have evidence, and so I feel very comfortable
Right.
leading people down this path.
And you mentioned something earlier that it's difficult to learn, but then long-term CBT-I, difficult to learn as the practitioner, but then long-term it's I don't know if you said easier but it's beneficial and it's doable.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love that because I
yeah,
think CBT, when we were talking about earlier and like the misperceptions of it, is like it I think it's like so simplified, and that's where we fall. It's like, oh, here's this simple answer. And so it sounds like CBTI has a more complex kind of underpinning, and you have to learn that really well as a clinician in order to be effective. Can you tell me a little bit more about the process, or yeah, what comes up for you?
I would love to, but like first, I want to say, look, if somebody is out there and they're struggling with insomnia, and they hear about like, well, try this, relaxo herb, or you know, there's so much marketing. Please do yourself a favor and just Google CBTI directory. And that will lead you to a directory of people, therapists who practice CBTI. And it's like state by state. You just click in your state and names will come up of people who can help you, who can do this therapy with you. Some take insurance, some don't. There are various different types of practitioners who do this, everybody from, nurse practitioners to psychologists, and all kinds of people. But please do yourself a favor and check it out.
Are there any questions that you would say for someone to ask when they're looking for a practitioner?
You know what? I like the old, hey, how many of these have you done? How many people have you helped with this? Sometimes that's worthwhile. However, I gotta say, sometimes there's like new people who are really, really good. But I think that's sort of like a good indication of how good somebody is going to be. And I also think, you just got to talk to the person and feel like you can work with them. There are really very smart people out there who have done great research in CBTI and who know it backwards and forwards. But if you don't have a connection with that person, I think it's hard to work with them. So it's like, number one, you got to get somebody who's good at what they're doing, who, knows this kind of treatment, and, is listed like in a directory or something like that. And number two, you got to feel a connection with them. You got to feel like you can talk to them, tell them how it is, and, that kind of thing. So I think those two things are pretty good.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
What is some of the first things that you do with clients, aside from relationship building? That's an incredibly important part of it. And then what are some of the techniques that you tend to go into?
Well, the first thing that I do with people is I get them to keep a sleep diary, which, it's a little bit hard sometimes to keep a sleep diary. It's a pain, but I tell them this, look, do it in the morning. Do it when you get up, because believe it or not, research shows that like your memory of what happened the night before is really good in the morning. So if you just take like a minute in the morning to fill out this diary about what happened the night before, you're going to get really good data. You're going to record your night's sleep or non-sleep, as it were, really, really well.
Is it just pen and paper, or do you have an app? Like, is that there apps that people use?
Well, you know what? I use the old-fashioned pen and paper, but I also have people who like to do it on a spreadsheet. They do it that way. And there is in the works an app for it. And I can't wait for that app to come out.
Yeah, I have a 4-month-old and I track her sleep on a baby app. And so it's like, you could easily use that if there's no actual adult app for tracking sleep. I'd have to check, but I don't know of one.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you have them track their sleep.
Yeah, have them track their sleep. And then I get the good, the bad, the ugly, the first week or so, and I get like a baseline of how their sleep is. And then, this is where, when we were talking about relationship building and the trade-off between, building a relationship with somebody and telling them what to do. Like, I'm pretty directive. I'll look at their sleep and I'll say, look, I think you should change this or that. Usually, things like waking up at the same time every day, or getting out of bed rather than struggling in the bed with anxiety and angst. Or, I think you should be going to bed a little bit later. Things like this. I tell people what to do. But it's always a collaborative thing. And I'm never going to say, I always say to people, you know what, I'm never going to tell you what to do without you fully understanding why you should be doing it, how it can help, and how to do it. So I act like a college professor a lot. I use a lot of like graphs and charts and explanatory things, and explain to people like, okay, see, one of the things I'm telling you to do is I'm telling you to get up at the same time every day. So here's why. And I pull up all these graphs about circadian rhythm and, all this stuff, because I want the people who I work with to really like be on board, and I want it to be theirs. I want them to feel like an expert on their own sleep. That's the magic. When somebody feels like they get what's going on and they get how to help themselves, and then it works, it's like, oh crap, this is wonderful, and that's why I love this treatment. Because, I get to be a bit of a college professor, which I kind of am. I am. And people really learn it and they get it and they feel like it's theirs. They're now the expert. And then they go out and they tell their family what to do. That's why I love this. I love to, share research, good research-based stuff that I know works with people. And have them really get it and take it themselves and feel like the expert. It's so wonderful.
Yeah. I love that. I also use the circadian rhythm with a lot of clients, and especially for females, our hormonal 28-day cycle that plays a part into it too. And it's so much about education, which is hard if you don't. So like as the therapist, you have to really, really know this stuff so that you can then educate about it in a way that comes across clear, and also so that you can troubleshoot. If you kind of just know a little bit here and there, then if a client comes across an obstacle, then maybe it's going to be hard to overcome that obstacle, which is why I think maybe, and I'm saying all this because as therapists, I think historically are really scared to talk about anything with the body because we work with the mind. And when you're a chronic illness therapist, whether that's for chronic insomnia or chronic pain or anything, we have to have this education ready in our own brains and then help our clients learn it too. And education is key, and letting someone then take it and it's their own, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's sort of like in a nutshell what I do. And then we get into more complex things like a sleep window, like the ideal sleep window, and what's your real sleep need? Do you really need 8 hours a night like they tell you need? I don't know. Let's look at this. So it's a deep dive into sleep and making sleep better. So yeah.
What are some other kind of myths that you might dispel? Like, I mean, you don't all need 8 hours, and there's a way to figure that out. What other kind of things
Yeah.
come up?
Oh boy. I think, look, I think the biggest myth is that, you know, when you hear about things marketed to sleep, I think the biggest myth is that you should sort of like question that. Like, do you really, is it really going to be a mattress? Is it really going to be blocked out blinds? Is it really going to be white noise? I don't know. I don't know that those things really work, but they're marketed like this is the answer. This is the key. And that always bugs me because I see a lot of people who go through countless things like that. And all it does is, number one, not work, and number two, make them more hopeless. So I think the biggest myth is that, don't buy all the stuff. Don't buy, literally and figuratively, all the stuff that's marketed toward good sleep.
Yeah, you mentioned waking up at the same time every day. I know that's incredibly important for melatonin production later on at night.
You got it.
Can you speak a little more to that? So kind of provide a little bit of that education for listeners so they can kind of understand, or even maybe other pieces as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Destiny, because that's the only piece of advice that I like to give to people I don't know.
Gotcha.
Because sometimes if you throw out other pieces or quote sleep tips, it just feeds into the cycle of hopelessness. They say, well, I tried this and I tried that and it didn't work. Well, it won't. I don't want to feed into the cycle of hopelessness, so I almost never will give out quote sleep tips.
Got it. Yeah, that's great.
The only one thing that I say is getting up at the same time every day is sort of like a superhero for sleep, because insomnia is a 24-hour problem, and it starts in the morning. And that's one change that I think is important for people who have sleeping problems to consider making, is just make an effort to get up sort of at the same time every day. That's like the only piece of advice that I like to really give.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I think a lot of times we're really quick to try to give like tips and advice, and
I know
it's the trendy thing to do. So I love that transparency. It work with a professional who's trained in this stuff, because your unique circumstances are just that. They're unique. And if you give the wrong tip to the wrong person, yeah, it feeds into this cycle of hopelessness, like you said.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to working with this population?
Oh, thank you for asking that. For a long time, I was an assessment, I still am an assessment psychologist, which means I give people a lot of tests and personality-ish things and diagnostic things. And I love doing that. And assessing sleep is another type of assessment. So you have to really get like almost like on a granular level, how people sleep with the sleep diary and all this stuff. And I love that. So first, my love of assessment. And then my second thing that I really love is anxiety. I know it's bizarre to hear somebody say they love anxiety, but I do, because I think anxiety is something, it's part of the human condition. We're all supposed to be anxious about stuff. So for a long time, I've loved therapy for anxiety. And doing sleep therapy is a way for me to sort of like kind of condense anxiety into sleep anxiety. Like it's a small area of anxiety that you can sort of like work on and get better at. So I like doing that too. So that's sort of like what drew me to it. And then, oh my gosh, the third thing was the data. the evidence that it works. I fell in love with that. So I think those three things really drew me to insomnia treatment.
I like what you said about anxiety and how it's normal. It's a natural part of life. It
It
actually
is.
gives us data to tell us what's important to us. And so if you can accept it and acknowledge it first, then you can kind of start working through it. It sounds like that's what you do.
Yes, yes. And like some of the newer treatments for anxiety, like we were talking about CBT earlier, and like, oh, you got to question your thoughts and all this. Some of the newer like CBT type treatments are, you don't even question your thoughts. You just sort of let them come. There it is. Okay, hello. There's my anxiety thought about the presentation I'm going to give at work today. There it is. Hello, anxiety thought. How are you doing? you know,
Yes.
you just let it sort of be there, and
Yeah.
you accept it. And it's really great to be able to learn about all these new approaches to anxiety, because those work too.
Yeah, that's exactly how I practice. I practice from acceptance and commitment therapy.
Oh yeah,
So
that's
it's
good stuff.
a lot of
That's
thought observation, and for people listening, there's skills that you can learn. It's not just as simple as like, oh, so just acknowledge, just throw my thoughts over to the side. No, we practice some skills that help you get there. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Gotta say, even though I'm a big fan, obviously, of CBT-I, most people who practice CBT-I actually also know about
act.
acceptance
Yeah.
commitment therapy for insomnia.
It
You
was
know,
sounding like that as you were talking about it. I'm like, okay, there's a lot of overlap here. And I know this third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy, there's mindfulness based CBT, there's, they're bringing in more of those components. So I think it is a lot less change your thoughts, change your life, and more like there's like more acceptance weaved within it, which is really helpful.
yeah, and really kind of fun, dare I say it. I
It
mean,
can be.
it, really, and that's another thing that I think is important about the therapy piece of working with somebody on insomnia. Is insomnia is a horror for people. It's a horror. It's a nightly horror. And to be able to finally talk to a therapist all about this particular horror is so relieving. And to actually have that therapist sort of like go into that world with you and recharacterize it as something that you can actually sort of like welcome. What? Like, that's bizarre. But that's what I like to invite people to do, because it's there anyway.
That's exactly, we're living in it. And so the more you fight it, the more it grows, right? And
Right.
it's ironic, but
It is ironic because of course, we're all taught to fight things off. And to a certain extent, you can't fight off your own mind. Um, so that's one thing that I love to work with people on. And once they get to the point where they sort of like are more accepting, it becomes a lot easier. Ironically, it's ironic.
it's so ironic. I know. And I always just think about Carl Rogers' quote: the curious paradox is that the more that I accept who I am, the more I can change. It's like,
That's one of my favorites.
yeah, it's perfect.
It is. It really is.
Yeah, it is so hard to wrap your head around when you're brand new to this idea. And I think the idea itself can even feel invalidating because we are taught to fight everything. That's
Mhm.
what our country was founded on. That's what is kind of systemically in this entire this whole system that we're in. It's like, work hard. If you work hard, your dreams will come true. If you work hard, your life will be great. If you work hard, like if you just put the work in, this will work out. And I think the human experience is so, that is not true. I mean, things happen, right? Like you can do everything quote right, and then tragedy strikes, or and so yes, we do try to do what we can, and we do need to work hard in a lot of areas, but sometimes working hard is actually counterproductive to the outcome that we're trying to achieve.
Yes. Yes. And, as you know, like you can, if you're in a hole and you have a shovel and all you're doing is digging with the shovel, you're just going to dig a deeper hole.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to change it up.
Right. Yep.
And not fight so hard and try so hard.
Yeah. So can you tell us about why sleep is so important, especially when it comes to chronic illnesses? Insomnia can be chronic in and of itself, but can you just talk a little bit about the education behind why sleep is so important for the body?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, sleep just makes you feel better. To really put it simply,
I like that.
that's the bottom line. It just makes you feel better. And there was in the field of like mental health, it was commonly thought that, hey, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, or if you have a chronic illness, you cope with that. You treat the depression, you treat the chronic illness, and then the insomnia will just sort of like go away. And that's actually not exactly true. But the odd thing is, the data show that, like, if you treat the insomnia, if you help people sleep better, it kind of makes everything better, a little bit, not a lot. It doesn't make the chronic illness go away, but it makes it just a little better to deal with if you're sleeping better. So it's real simple. Sleep just makes you feel a little better, it's yeah. And there, of course, you can say, oh well, it makes the cortisol levels even, it makes this and that. Okay, let's just get simple. It just makes you feel better.
I like that. Yeah, you're right. Bring it back to basics. I think sometimes we get caught up in all the complexity. I think also sometimes people need a little bit more of that complexity in order to like resonate with the treatment. If it doesn't feel complex, then they feel like it's not right, because they're so used to everything being so complicated. There's so much marketing out there that gives us so much information. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, I think that's why I like your one tip of like, get up early every morning, because not early every morning.
Early,
yeah, I said that wrong.
Time you pick as your time. It could be 3 p.m. if that's your time,
just make sure it's the same, around the same time every day. Is that, yeah. And I think what a lot of us hear is like, go to bed at the same time every night. And that,
I know, but that troubles me for people with insomnia, because sometimes the worst is like, oh, I have to go to bed at 10 p.m. because I have a big day ahead, and I have to do this and I have to do that. And then that feeds into the cycle of like anxiety and struggling to sleep.
right.
And oh boy, so I don't get hung up on bedtime.
I love that. Yeah. When you're getting up around the same time every day, your circadian clock can start to do what it needs to do and get you on a rhythm, which I'm sure takes time, and lots of other tools go into that. But sounds like a really great starting point.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you have in regard to sleep or chronic illness that feels like, important for people to know?
Oh gosh. Well, the first thing is, hey, check out CBT-I. Go to a directory. Just Google CBT-I directory, and you'll get one of two directories. One is put out by the University of Pennsylvania Sleep Medicine, and they have a directory of people who practice CBT-I. The second one is put out by the Society for Behavioral Sleep Medicine, and they have a similar directory, state by state, even international, where you can plug in your state, and some practitioners will come up who practice CBT-I. You also could consult any kind of sleep medicine center. Sleep medicine centers, however, are geared toward diagnosis and treatment of sleep apnea a lot, and narcolepsy, and the more occult sleep disorders. So it's not bad to go there. But and also, they do sometimes have CBT-I practitioners who can help with that too. So you know what? Don't try the next relaxo herb that is marketed to you. Please, seek out, a professional who knows how to deal with sleep issues.
Yeah.
That's
think
the best thing.
It's great advice. Yeah, there's so much marketing for everything with chronic illness. It's so overwhelming.
I know. And I too, like you, I get angry when I see marketing toward people with chronic illnesses or like mental illness, and they act like, oh, well, this is the thing that's going to help you. This is the key that's going to turn the lock, that's going to make everything different for you. And it really annoys me, because I think, people, look, hey, anybody with any kind of chronic problem is sort of like looking for that, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not. We're all looking for the magic.
Right.
And
so it feeds into
is slick. Marketing will fool everybody.
Yeah. It can be, for sure. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And lastly, can you kind of leave us with a little bit of like, what keeps you just feeling fresh and alive and hopeful? And maybe in the context is for someone who's living with a chronic illness, or how you help your clients do that.
Wow. Boy, I don't know. That's a hard question, but it's a good question. I think, what we were talking earlier about acceptance. And I think that, it's such a simple thing, but just to accept who you are and where things are at for you now. It sounds like completely easy, but on the other hand, I think it's the struggle of our lifetimes. Like, just to accept ourselves and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I've got. And without shame, interact with the world as you are, whether you have a chronic illness or not, or whatever,
Yeah, that acceptance piece, it brings a lot of hope. That's why it's the main tenet of my work as well. And you're right, it sounds so simple, but that's why, I mean, it's not at all like, and I get that. So the last thing I ever want to do is give a tip or a trick or advice and say to someone, well, if you just accept, or if you just, then you will feel X, Y, and Z. It's, again, like I said earlier, we have tools that we teach within our therapy modalities that help you get there. And that's really what therapy is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's very hard to accept yourself, because the world wants to push us into like what's convenient for the world. And we have to constantly advocate for what's convenient for us in a way that's nice and respectful of everybody else. It's hard.
Yeah, that's hard. It is. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you want to say before we hop off?
Just, if you're struggling with sleep, look at CBT-I directory, Google that, see what comes up, and find somebody in your state who can help you. Go to a sleep center, and seek out, professional help. And don't get hopeless if you've tried a lot of stuff and it hasn't worked. It's easy to get hopeless.
Sounds like the main takeaway from today is don't DIY your sleep.
To a certain, sometimes doing that can help a little bit. Really,
Yeah.
I understand why people do it, but if you do it and you feel hopeless after, then you might want to consider professional help, and then no longer do it yourself.
Yeah, that's
You
a
know,
good sign.
Yeah, every once in a while, like, hey, if there's a piece of sleep advice and you take it and it works, that's cool.
Yeah.
You know, but if you're taking sleep advice over and over and you try all kinds of stuff and it's not working and you're feeling hopeless, and it's like that hopeless feeling, then, oh my gosh, reach out, because none of us are meant to do stuff alone.
I like that. I like that because that actually is a tip, right? Is that if
Yeah.
what you're trying makes you feel hopeless,
Yes.
that is the sign that you need some professional help.
You gotta take somebody's hand.
Yes. Love that. Thank you so much, Dr. McFarland. This was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, it really was nice to talk to you.
If you learned something new today, consider writing it down in your phone notes or journal and make that new neural pathway light up. Better yet, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram, email me, or leave a voice memo for us to play on the next show. The way you summarize your takeaways can be the perfect little soundbite that someone else might need in order to better absorb the same lesson. Lastly, leaving a review really helps others find this podcast, so please do so if you found this episode helpful.